Greetings, I am Empress Aziza, and you are listening to the West Indian Magazine vlogcast. Let me express my sincerest gratitude to you for taking the time to listen and understand my perspective. Your open-mindedness is truly commendable. The state of our world is heading off the rails. There is a cleanup of our physical and spiritual world in progress. I trust that you are flowing with these through this conscious shift we are experiencing in this realm. This vlogcast is entitled The Legacy of Colonialism, Unequal Power Structures, and Lingering Trauma. COVID-19 was a game changer. They shut us in and forced us to reevaluate what we really need. We were discovering new voices, new ideas and ideals, new thoughts and viewpoints. We were able to look at our lives with a critical eye. It is my hope that the information in this vlogcast fill in some of the missing keys for you and help you to understand what has happened to us and the manipulation that was done to us by our leaders who had their own interests at heart and forgot about us. This vlog will be in two parts. The first part gives you a bird's eye view of the political games that played and used us as pawns to further their agenda. This is about Prime Minister Mia Motley, yet it isn't. She too was duped into believing that she was in charge when really and truly she was a puppet and a pawn in a stage play that goes back centuries. She never had any real power. It was all an illusion. In part 2, we will take a look at COVID-19, the Sesquivi, the Republic, and the way forward as the system comes to an end. I recommend you pause the video from time to time to read the many receipts provided. We are almost at the end of this cycle that has kept us imprisoned for generations. Very soon, we will be in a paradise and a return to the sweet waters of the Divine Mother. My suggestion, find a quiet place. Get your wine, your beer, or your water. Plug in your headphones, sit back, relax, and breathe. This is go time. We must look beyond the polished speeches and uncover the truth about our leaders. We must go beyond the glamour of the world and start making our leaders account to us. It is about accountability, truth, justice, and the trust between a nation and its leader. In recent days, the issue of government accountability was brought into sharp focus when a question was asked over and over again: why can politicians so easily dodge accountability for their mistakes? The troubling answer: because they can. Barbados as a corporation was established in 1966 after Barrow challenged the colonial establishment. Before that, Barbados was a sovereign nation. Upon independence of Barbados, Barrow was given a Westminster Model Constitution, which became the supreme law of the land. It provided a legal establishment of the government of Barbados, as well as legal rights and responsibilities of the public and various other government offices. Why was Barbados made independent? The people wanted to govern their own affairs politically, culturally, and economically. On November 2021, Prime Minister Mia Motley declared Barbados a republic and broke from the monarch to the tune of $490 million supplied by China. China's investment stocks in Barbados increased from under $2 billion in 2004 to almost $10 billion in 2019. Politicians are those who exercise power on behalf of the population, providing governance, representation, and negotiation. Like police, there are policy enforcers for the colonial establishment. They are in essence placed as board members to manage the affairs of the stakeholders, which is the public. Government's accountability and transparency means that public officials, elected and unelected, have an obligation to explain their decisions and actions to the citizens. In a democracy, the principle of accountability holds that government officials are responsible to the citizenry for their decisions and actions, that they act in the public interest and not their own self-interest. In order to hold officials accountable, the principle of transparency requires that the decisions and actions of those in government be open to the public scrutiny, and that the public has a right to access information about how government decisions are made and carried out. The Prime Minister and ministers report to you through the address to the nation as a means to update you on the state of the country. If they're not doing their job, then it is up to you, the stakeholders, to fire them through voting them out of office. Ministers are not just accountable for significant errors made within their ministry, but also for behaviors deemed contrary to their ministerial code of conduct. Time magazine quotes Prime Minister Motley as saying, "The choice of my public life has been to be a lawyer, an advocate, as well as to be a representative of the people." There are checks and balances for politicians called ministerial codes of conduct. Ministerial codes of conduct are high standards of behavior in which ministers are expected to behave in a way that upholds the highest standards of propriety. The code is underpinned by key principles such as integrity, fairness, accountability, responsibility, and public interest. Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley, Ma'am or Auntie Mia as the people lovingly or mockingly call her, has been a Member of Parliament for the constituency of St. Michael North East since 1994. She is loved by many and not viewed fondly by others. Her constituents adore her and saw her as one of them. She was a woman of the people, and like a social chameleon, she could morph with the middle class and grassroots seamlessly. She is a master at the art of manipulation. After all, she learned from her grandfather, who was a career politician. She is charismatic and well-spoken, and is described as an Obama-esque levels of oratory skills. Not everyone who has worked with her speaks glowingly of her. She has been labeled as hypocritical, lack transparency, and is trying to tax her way out of a recession. You either love her or hate her. The late Owen Arthur, a former prime minister under whom Motley served in various cabinet positions, once called his protege a despot. A despot is a person exercising absolute power in a brutal or oppressive way. That is a damning indictment, and one Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley opponents co-sign with, as they paint her as an aggressive individual who allows little room for dissent within her circle. Former government Senator Lucille Moore has expressed fears about Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley being given another mandate to run Barbados's political affairs. What is interesting is that Mo once served as Minister of Information and was a lifelong friend of Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley, even referring to her as her little sister. Lucille Mo said, "I am afraid." Mo says power has changed PM Motley. She told the Barbados Today that she has become dictatorial in her style of politics. She is an autocrat and does not allow anyone to have any kind of view or opinion. Everyone must be in Mia Amor Motley corner, or it is a problem. Something happened. Something happened in 2020 that altered the people's view of her. Maybe she outgrew them, or maybe there was a shift in the consciousness of the people. What happened? When did the love affair end? Was she replaced? Was she cloned? Was she MK Ultra'd? Or was she demoted? Did the love of money change her? Or was it the power, ambition, and drive? At no disrespect from this point forward, I will refer to Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley as ma'am. With that said, let's continue. When a disaster strikes, populations look to their leaders to help them interpret the situation and to offer reassurance about how soon a return to normalcy can begin. In March 2020, that normalcy would forever be changed when COVID-19 intruded on the lives of the people. COVID-19 was a shock to the people. They were scared, had doubts and uncertainty. Those who they trusted, the doctors, the lawyers, the politicians, and leaders, as well as pastors, show little care. Public behavior and response are often shaped by how well or how poorly leaders cultivate trust, demonstrate empathy, and display a steadfast demeanor in their resolve to move through and beyond the crisis. The attitudes displayed by those so-called leaders was one of condescending. It didn't matter what the people said at those town hall meetings, they were not concerned and was unbending. Crises often serve as defining moments for public leaders, and their recognition of and response to the event can influence immediate and long-term disaster outcomes for their populations. Perhaps this is where the people fell out of love. They felt ignored and unimportant. 4 years later, they are still struggling with the uncertainty of what tomorrow brings. Some of them have buried loved ones, and others are still sick. Yet no one has reached out to them to offer any counseling or psychological help to deal with their loss. Perhaps if MAM used some of their money she received from the pandemic to help the populace with therapy, perhaps that might have made a difference. Let's not forget, MAM's meteoric rise happened on a large scale due to the COVID crisis. At the height of the crisis, from a small island perspective, MAM appeared to show crisis leadership in how she handled the early stages of the pandemic. If MAM thought she was in charge, she was reminded quickly that she was at best an administrator and she worked for the colonial establishment. She had to stay on message or else. For example, all across the Caribbean and the mainland, the directive was all private businesses were to ensure employees get the bioweapon against COVID-19 or submit to regular testing. Since Barbados and the other Caribbean territories are considered a part of North America, that directive was administered by all of them to their sovereigns. MAM, under orders from her superiors, embarked on a relentless campaign from March through May 2020, delivering press briefings and speeches to the populace, almost at times with a harsh and cutting tone. Like children would a parent, the people traumatized with fear and uncertainty would have done anything she said. She was their Auntie Mia. So when the bioweapon was made available, the people lined up like they were at a Jim Jones concert. Remember, they loved her. She was one of them. Thousands of people, especially the Barbados middle class, were on board. COVID-19 put her on the map, and climate change, she was hoping, will keep her there. It is a legacy she hoped to create, since all other positions were filled by those who had gone before her. As Kamala would remind us, her dreams, her hopes, her aspirations and ambitions rest in the hands of her good friend Avinash Prasad, a social climber and handler who would do everything in his power to see his good friend elevate to the status as a UN Council General. That is the ultimate goal. The plan was in motion, and everyone except for the populace whose hopes, ambitions, dreams, and aspirations will never be realized. In all that was happening, no one saw the white elephant in the room. No one saw the hidden hand. The art of war, is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. This article is about a partnership between ProPublica and the New York Times Magazine, titled The Barbados Rebellion. The article gives us a good starting point of where Barbados is financially and the game played to secure financing from the IMF, which placed Barbados further in debt. It also sets the tone for who is pulling the strings behind the scenes for the restructuring of Barbados's $8 billion debt. Oh, the fraud of it all. Late on May 31st, 2018, 5 days after she was sworn in as Prime Minister of Barbados, Mayor Amor Motley and her top advisors gathered in the windowless anteroom of her administrative office in Bridgetown, the capital, for a call that would determine the fate of her island nation. The group settled into uncomfortable straight-back chairs around a small mahogany table, staring at framed posters of Barbados's windmills and sugarcane fields. Motley, who was then 52, can appear mischievous in moments before her bluntest declarations, but on this evening her steely side showed. She placed her personal cell phone on speaker and dialed a number in Washington for the International Monetary Fund. As arranged, Christine Lagarde, the managing director, answered. Motley got to the point. Barbados was out of money. It was so broke that it was taking out new loans just to pay the interest on the old ones, even as its infrastructure was coming undone. Soon the nation would have no choice but to declare itself insolvent, instigating a battle with the dozens of banks and creditors that held its $8 billion in debt, and triggering austerity measures that would spiral the island into further poverty. There was another way, Motley said, but she needed Lagarde's help. Motley, the first woman to lead Barbados, had been working towards this conversation for nearly 2 years, consulting expert financial and legal advisors to develop a plan that would restructure the country's soaring debts in a way that would free up money to invest in Barbados's economy. Then, 9 months before voting day, that plan took on a new urgency as two powerful hurricanes ripped through the Caribbean 12 days apart. They missed Barbados, but one of them obliterated nearby Dominica. In Motley's view, that obliteration was like a nuclear event. It was increasingly clear that climate change would make all projects that Barbados already could not afford more necessary and more expensive. The storm reveals that even the most heroic economic planning could be laid to waste in a moment. It was already obvious that every climate crisis was an economic crisis, but going forward, she realized every economic crisis would effectively be a climate crisis. For Motley, this meant the money she needed the IMF to help her recoup wasn't just for her people's prosperity, but for their survival. Motley's insistence on speaking directly with Lagarde, she had been pushing for the meeting for nearly a week while Lagarde's office demurred, was an unorthodox way to approach the leader of one of the world's dominant economic institutions. Having descended from 2 generations of elite politicians, Motley had learned, though, that important decisions at large organizations are made at the top. Her grandfather was the mayor of Bridgetown. Her father served as a country's consul general to the United States. She was groomed at the island's elite girls' academy, Queens College, and at a private United Nations International School in New York. Besides her, in the anteroom was her advisor, Avinav Prasad, a close friend since the days when they each studied at the London School of Economics, where she received her law degree in 1986. Prasad, who went on to lead research departments at JP Morgan and State Street Bank, was deeply knowledgeable about development finance. The two friends were joined by the principals of a little-known but influential London financial firm called White Oak Advisory, Sebastian Espinoza and David Nagoski. Debt experts who had developed a novel contractual clause to protect countries from at least some of the economic consequences of climate-driven catastrophes. With Lagarde on the phone, Motley made her pitch. Barbados, she said, was going to default on the debt it owed to private banks and investors. She wanted Lagarde's support in persuading them to negotiate its terms. The IMF is both the assessor and the enforcer of global economic policy, the de facto gatekeeper to the world's capital markets. Motley knew that banks and investors would work with her only if Barbados was participating in a formal IMF program for economic reform, and it had to start immediately. Motley told Lagarde that Barbados was prepared to do voluntarily what most countries have to be coerced to do: cut its budget and raise taxes. But she needed something in return. With the effects of climate change bearing down on the region, the kind of austerity the IMF demanded from developing nations, slashing the size of government agencies and firing thousands of public employees while auctioning off real estate and other national assets, would no longer work. Motley wanted Lagarde to endorse an economic program that would still allow her to raise salaries of civil servants, build schools, and improve piping and wiring for water and power. Before you carry people on a long journey, she told Lagarde, you have to give them a little breakfast. Barbados, while considered relatively wealthy by the World Bank standards, hadn't been able to borrow on the international market since 2013, and it had no capacity to pay for essential programs and projects. The concern was immediate, Motley explained. Hurricane season was about to begin, and the room fell quiet. No one was sure how Lagarde would respond. Would she trust Motley to spend on Barbados first, or demand, as the IMF usually did, deference to debtors? Then, as Motley's advisors recall, came the director's surprising reply. She was extremely supportive of what Motley was proposing. The next day, Motley declared that Barbados would stop making its payment on the nation's debts. Today, my friends, we pry off the hands that have been strangling us, she said. Some of the business leaders that she had gathered to stand behind her at the lectern winched. The value of Barbados's bonds on the global markets crashed. S&P Global downgraded the island's credit. The country teetered on the edge of financial chaos. With that, Motley's adventure onto the global stage of financial and climate change activism began. What Motley sought was not to be easy. She would have to untangle the relationships connecting the IMF with the financial institutions that invest in countries like Barbados, a global financial system that simultaneously helps and preys upon countries at their moments of greatest need. She would have to challenge the rules of that system and its powerful figures, who often struggle to recognize how climate change is altering the traditional dynamics of debt development. Motley would come to see the traps of that system as fundamentally unjust, born from generations of colonial rule. Just as outsiders once pillaged the Caribbean for wealth created by the hands of slaves, investors in those former imperial powers now squeeze former territories for their assets, for access to markets, and for interest on loans. As she will have to contend with all that's waiting for the next storm, knowing she governed a dot of land isolated in one of the most vulnerable places on earth. I will say this, and I know you will agree. Mom dug a hole so deep for herself that she needed all the financial rope she could find, even if that meant making compromises. There's a saying, when you pray for rain, you have to deal with the mud too. Avinash Prasad is the yin to Mom's yang. I know more about him, and I've heard more from him than any of the 30 court jesters that warm the benches of Parliament and are paid handsomely to do so. What did Kanye West say? Feeling like my life froze? I'm about to hit the ground. I sold my soul to the devil. That's a crappy deal. Least it came with a few toys like a Happy Meal. This game you would never win, 'cause they love you, then they hate you, then they love you again. Get away from the misery. Who is Avinav Prasad? Avinav Prasad is Emeritus Professor of Gisham College in the UK. He was chairman of Intelligence Capital Limited, a company specializing in analyzing, managing, and creating financial liquidity in investment projects and portfolios. He was also the non-executive chairman of the London-based Elara Capital, an investment bank. Prasad was a non-resident senior fellow of Peterson Institute of International Economics, executive fellow of London Business School, and senior fellow with the Caribbean Policy Research Institute and head of its Barbados office. He was previously managing director and global head of research at State Street Bank, the world's largest institutional investor, and global head of currency and commodity research at JP Morgan. He was ranked within the top 3 of currency analysts in major international investor surveys between 1992 and 1999. In December 2009, he was listed by a high-level panel set up by Prospect Magazine, second of 25 world brains who have been the best contributors in the public conversation on financial crisis. Prasad was chairman of the Financial Services Commission of Barbados. He was co-chair of the OECD Emerging Market Network. He was a director of the Global Association of Risk Professionals. In 2008, he was appointed member of a French Presidential Commission on the Global Credit Crunch. He was an economic expert on the UK government's advisory panel on public sector information. In 2001, he was made a distinguished visitor of the Republic of Singapore. He was appointed a visiting scholar of the International Monetary Fund, working on risk appetite measures, and a visiting researcher at the European Central Bank, working on issues of liquidity and transparency in European financial markets. He is frequently a guest speaker at G20 central banks and meetings of officials. A stellar resume, which sets him up nicely as a deep state operative installed by the establishment. The deep state are globalist parasitocrats described and qualified by name: Illuminati, insiders, deep state, more specifically Rothschild, Khazarian mafia, elite, establishment, or powers that be. These are the ones who run the Masonic net Jewish central bank cartel, the CIS, MI6, and Mossad, destabilizing governments, corporations, law enforcement, education, and the media in a plot to dispose and enslave humanity. The deep state cabal has a lot of power over all of our lives, here and in the whole world. Mom was in trouble and needed a lifeline. Prasad offered her that lifeline. Prasad and his buddies, White Oak Advisory, sold Ma'am and Barbados up a creek without a paddle to the tune of $54 million for debt restructuring. The plan was the Bridgetown Initiative. This was a proposal to reform the world of development finance, particularly how rich countries help poor countries cope with and adapt to climate change. He was the hidden hand, the one mover and shaker in the background under the guise of advisor. He knew what the problem was. He already had the reaction, and now he offered the solution. You know what comes to mind is Michael Jackson's Smooth Criminal, which is playing in the background. Have you ever heard the term snake oil salesman? Well, Prasad follows the dollar signs. His ambition before anything or anyone is the money. He, again, is the hidden hand behind the COVID-19 bioweapon, the national ID cards, and now the Climate Change Initiative. What did Ma'am say to Lagarde? Before you carry people on a long journey, you have to give them a little breakfast. At the UN Summit, Multilateral Solutions for a Better Tomorrow in September 2024, Ma'am spoke eloquently and unapologetically about the Climate Change Initiative. Her oratory skills were described as Obama-esque levels of oratory, clarity, measured, and eloquent. At the summit, Ma'am told her audience that we need a reset. We are all in this together. If we don't realize that, we will not act with the urgency that's necessary to save the planet and save lives. What Avannath Prasad and his friends were hoping to do was to update the Bretton Woods system, which formed the IMF and the World Bank with the Bridgetown Initiative. They were hoping to tap into the IMF Trust, which is $4 trillion, under the special drawing rights, which was worth $100 billion, which were to be transferred to low-income countries to be used for climate change programs. How much more can this process of manipulation actually be magnified when it corresponds with more wealth, corruption, and power than most of us can even imagine? 1 Timothy 6:10 says, "For the love of money is the root of all evil. And while some have coveted after it, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." In Ma'am's quest for power, legitimacy, and legacy, she misused the people and replaced their love with indifference, trust with mistrust, adoration and kindness with hate and bitterness. Now the piper is here to collect after holding up his end of the deal. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Avannath Prasad was driving this car and Ma'am was riding shotgun. When a country gets in bed with the IMF, they could as well wear gasoline drawers and light a match. The IMF has been playing pawnbroker and loan shark with countries. The IMF or the World Bank confiscate all natural resources under the guise of new loans and humanitarian aid. Let's just ask the Tunisian president, who stated that Tunisia is not for sale. The IMF must understand human beings are not a set of numbers to be added or subtracted. ProPublica states that the IMF, the most powerful global institution, routinely uses its leverage to impose strict economic criteria for financial health that wound up forcing countries like Barbados to spend money they might have used for infrastructure and other improvements to pay for foreign banks and investors instead. Keep in mind, Barbados' national debt from 2019 to 2023 was $8 billion US.